Well, let's get started. I have a PowerPoint, as you all know. I do that. I'm not going to use as many slides tonight as we have last time. Sometimes it's just more, I can connect with all of you better if I just look at you and talk. But we do have some slides that'll help us understand the material. And I just have to say that I have been so moved as I have studied this last month to prepare for this, with the power and the inspiration that's in 2 Nephi chapter 4. And can't give that to you, but I can point. This is where I found it. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Nephi tonight and his gifts and talents, his outline in 1st and 2nd Nephi. Lots of people get stuck in the most of 2nd Nephi, and I want to just talk through some things that have helped me. And then right in that transition between narrative and witnesses, we'll talk about is 2nd Nephi chapter 4 and Nephi's poem or his psalm. And that's where we'll spend most of our efforts tonight, is to try to figure out, what is Nephi telling us? Why is it important? What artistic value does it have, and so forth. So let's get started. Okay. Starting with Nephi, we recognize him as an amazing prophet, an amazing person who, there we go. I'm having a little technical difficulty here. All right. We recognize Nephi as a great prophet, somebody who was exactly obedient, is how I perceive him. And all of that is true. And if you look carefully through the text, though, you can find that he was kind of a Renaissance man, meaning he could do all kinds of things. And I just kind of wanted to highlight some of those now. For starters, he was very well educated. In fact, there's some scholars who say that that very first verse of chapter 1 of 1st Nephi, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, we all assumed that that meant he had good parents, righteous parents, attentive parents, model parents. And, nobody will dispute that for Lehi and Sariah. But there's some who say that the context of the sentence is that my parents were wealthy, and therefore I was able to get an education. I, Nephi, having goodly parents, therefore I was able to get educated in all the learning of my father, which consists of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. Well, regardless of what goodly means, one thing is certain, that Nephi had a wonderful classical education, which included Hebrew and Egyptian. And we know, for example, from Mosiah chapter 1, verse 4, that the brass plates were written in Egyptian. And of course, Nephi and Lehi could read those. We also know from Mormon chapter 9 that Moroni says that, the problem is that with Egyptian, you can't communicate the nuances of meaning as clearly as you could in Hebrew. And if they could have written in Hebrew, there would have been no imperfection. So since the brass plates were written in Egyptian, that means that Nephi or Lehi or others must have written in Hebrew. So he was well educated. We also know that he was very good at working with metal, of all things. For example, I notice here on this first picture, we've got Nephi making tools so that he can build a ship. And when the messenger up on the mountain told him, I need you to build a ship, Nephi did not say, man, I don't even know how to build tools. He said, if you can just show me the ore, I can make the tools. Now, what I don't know how to do is build a ship, but I can make the tools if you just give me the ore. So he could make tools. We know that he made the golden plates with his own hands. We also know that he took the sword of Laban and made many swords like it. And so he was able to smelt swords likened to the sword of Laban. And then he says in 2nd Nephi chapter 5, I did teach, verse 15, I did teach my people to build buildings and to work in all manner of wood and of iron and of copper and of brass and of steel and of gold and of silver and precious ores, which were in great abundance. So he could work all of those metals. And I just find that interesting. Nephi was talented in that way. He also was an architect and an engineer and a construction manager. Arguably God was the architect of both the boat and the temple. But it says that, Nephi had his people build a temple after the Temple of Solomon. Here's a picture of what that might have looked like. And of course, he built the ship. And so a lot of that was being trained by the Lord. But, I'm sure that Nephi learned a lot during all that process. We also know that he was a strong leader. This is a picture of him when he was, Nephi didn't like to be called the king, but he was the king. He just didn't want to be called that. He called it the protector and the teacher. But before that, it was Nephi who had gotten the brass plates, even though the lot originally fell to Laman, who was the oldest, who should have been the one that did it. Laman wasn't successful, and so Nephi took that role. Whenever Nephi broke his bow and they were starving to death, and even Lehi was, murmuring against the Lord, it was Nephi that kind of talked his dad off the ledge. It was Nephi who went out and found the food that it says, and we did not perish. So, they were on the verge of starvation if he had not delivered. It was Nephi, of course, who built the ship. It was Nephi who was the spiritual leader. So, he was an architect. He was an educated man. Obviously, he was a great prophet, historian, well-versed in the classics and also well-versed in the brass plates. And he had his own remarkable spiritual experiences. And he was also an accomplished poet. And we only have one of his poems, and we're going to be studying that in depth tonight. So Nephi was an incredibly gifted man. And his greatest gift was his spiritual gifts, but he was really talented in lots of areas. I can't wait to meet him. Now, one of the changing the subjects, and this doesn't really go with our presentation tonight, but I just wanted to talk about this a little bit more. And it just so happens that 2 Nephi chapter 4 is exactly at the transition of Nephi's outline. So, as you know, Nephi made the small plates 30 years after he got to the promised land. And then we know something about, what his outline was. And I think that it's important, at least it helps me to kind of signpost what he's doing. First, he summarized the book of Lehi. We talked about this 2 months ago. Second, and that was the first 10 chapters of First Nephi. Then Nephi gives his own historical narrative, starting with when he was transported by the Spirit into this mountain he'd never seen before, and he sees this amazing vision of the entire history of the world. And then, he talks about traveling in the wilderness and crossing the sea and all these other things that he does. And ultimately, they come to the promised land and build a temple and separate from his brothers. And that's the religious part. That's from 1 Nephi chapter 11 to 2 Nephi chapter 5. And then the narrative stops. And, I think it's pretty significant, the abrupt change, if you will, in Nephi's approach. He has been doing what we have, for example, in the Synoptic Gospels. He's been doing what we have in the Old Testament for the most part. He's been doing what we have when we read church history. He's been teaching us gospel lessons through the story of his family and their journeys, their trials, their tribulations, and so forth. And then for some reason, he stops that approach. His approach at that point is to talk about 3 witnesses. Witness number 1 is Jacob. He's a witness of Jesus Christ. Witness number 2 is Isaiah. And witness number 3 is Nephi himself. Witness number 1 is, let me share screen again with you. Witness number 1 is Jacob. Now it says in 2 Nephi chapter 5 that Jacob saw the Redeemer. Here's a picture of Jacob seeing the Redeemer. And Nephi gives us chapters 6 through 10 of Jacob's writings, because Jacob is an eyewitness of Jesus. He then gives us the writings of Isaiah, which is 2 Nephi chapters 2 through 24. And it's, not all of them, but a lot of the Christ-related chapters from Isaiah. And it also contains a lot of the chapters relating to the last days from Isaiah and the gathering of Israel at the last days. And then Nephi, who himself was also a witness of Jesus, and that's chapters 25 through 23. And that's all of Nephi's writing. Now, it's this is probably blasphemy to say, but if Nephi were to ask me, hey, Dan, do you have any advice on how I need to organize my book? I would say, well, if you're going to go with these three witnesses, you should tell us what you're doing. And he does tell us, but he doesn't tell us until after he finishes with Jacob. So in other words, in chapter 5, he stops telling a narrative. He stops telling stories. He stops telling the story of his family. Chapter 6, he just picks up with a talk from his brother Jacob that he gave. And by the way, it is an amazing section. Second Nephi chapter 9 is one of the not chapters. And it's just really, really good. Then you get to chapter 11 of Second Nephi, and that's where Nephi tells us what he's doing. He says, and now I, Nephi, write more of the words of Isaiah, for my soul delighteth in his words. This is chapter 11, verse 2. For I will liken his words unto my people, and I will send them forth unto all my children. For verily he, meaning Isaiah, saw my Redeemer, even as I have seen him. So Isaiah and Nephi have seen him, and my brother Jacob has also seen him, as I have seen him. Wherefore I will send their words forth unto my children to prove unto them that my words are true. Wherefore by the words of three, God hath said, will I establish my word. So Nephi's thought is God says that in order to establish his word, you need three witnesses. Nephi has three eyewitnesses of the Savior, Jacob, Isaiah, and Nephi himself. And so he stops writing a narrative and gives the testimony of these three eyewitnesses to Jesus Christ. And that's his outline. Another significant thing is that Nephi did not know when he started writing the small plates why he was doing it. But by the time he wrote his section, he knew exactly who his audience was. Nephi is talking to us. He is talking to the people in the latter days. He's talking about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. He's talking about the coming forth of the restoration of the gospel. He's talking about how the Gentiles will bring the gospel to his descendants. He's speaking directly to us, all ye ends of the earth. And so something happened to Nephi between 30 years after they left Jerusalem and 40 years after they left Jerusalem, where Nephi recognizes what he's supposed to do, and he stops telling stories and starts just giving pure doctrine in the form of these three witnesses. So I don't have more information than that about why Nephi did what he did, other than that it seems significant in terms of a literary technique that he would abruptly change his style of writing, and that he would do it that way. So all right, let's keep going to, by the way, right at the time that we make this transition, right at the time where Nephi stops talking about his story, his family story. And there was a lot he could have told us. He could have told us all about building the temple. He could have told us about all of his talks. He could have talked about the contention between Laman and Lemuel, talked about how God delivered them from their hands and how he let them escape and so forth. There's a lot of material that Nephi had, but he didn't tell us because he's got a new plan to give us these testimony of Jacob, Isaiah, and himself. But right in that transition, right when his father dies, Nephi gives us his poem, his what's been called now the Psalm of Nephi. And what I'd like to do, if I could, is I was so moved by reading it over and over again over the last few months that I memorized it. I memorized the whole thing. I don't know if I can get it word for word, but if I read it to you, then it doesn't capture the same feeling. That's the whole point of poems and arts. They have to be recited. So let me do my best to recite the Psalm of Nephi, which is Second Nephi chapter 4, verses 16 through 35. Behold, my soul delighteth in the things of the Lord, and my heart pondereth continually upon the things which I have seen and heard. Nevertheless, notwithstanding the great goodness of the Lord, and showing me his great and marvelous works, my heart exclaimeth, O wretched man that I am. Yea, my heart sorroweth because of my flesh. My soul grieveth because of mine iniquities. I am encompassed about because of the temptations and the sins which do so easily beset me. And when I desire to rejoice, my heart groaneth because of my sins. Nevertheless, I know in whom I have trusted. My God hath been my support. He hath led me through mine afflictions in the wilderness, and he hath preserved me upon the waters of the great deep. He hath filled me with his love, even unto the consuming of my flesh. He hath confounded mine enemies, unto the causing of them to quake before me. Behold, he hath heard my cry by day, and given me knowledge by visions in the nighttime. And by day have I waxed bold and mighty prayer before him. Yea, my voice have I sent up on high, and angels have come down and ministered unto me. And upon the wings of his spirit hath my body been carried away unto exceedingly high mountains. And mine eyes have beheld great things, yea, too great for man. Therefore I was bidden that I should not write them. Oh, then if I have seen so great things, and if the Lord in his condescension unto the children of men hath visited men in so much mercy, why should my heart weep, and my soul linger in the valley of sorrow, and my flesh waste away, and my strength slacken because of mine afflictions? And why should I yield to sin because of my flesh? Yea, why should I give way to temptations, that the evil one hath placed in my heart to destroy my peace and afflict my soul? Why am I angry because of mine enemies? Awake, my soul, no longer droop in sin. Rejoice, O my heart, and give place no more for the enemy of my soul. Do not anger again because of mine iniquities. Do not anger again because of mine enemies. Do not slacken my strength because of mine afflictions. Rejoice, O my heart, and cry unto the Lord and say, O Lord, I will praise thee forever. Yea, my soul will rejoice in thee, my God and the rock of my righteousness. O Lord, wilt thou redeem my soul? Wilt thou deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies? Wilt thou make me that I may shake even at the appearance of sin? May the gates of hell be shut continually before me, because that my heart is broken and my spirit is contrite. O Lord, wilt thou not shut the gates of thy righteousness before me, that I may walk in the path of the low valley, that I may be strict in the plain road. O Lord, wilt thou encircle me around in the robe of thy righteousness? O Lord, wilt thou make a way for mine escape before mine enemies? Wilt thou make my path straight before me? Wilt thou not place a stumbling block in my way, but that thou wouldst clear my way before me, and hedge not up my way, but the ways of mine enemy? O Lord, I have trusted in thee, and I will trust in thee forever. I will not put my trust in the arm of flesh, for I know that cursed is he that putteth his trust in the arm of flesh. Yea, cursed is he that putteth his trust in man, or maketh flesh his arm. Yea, I know that God will give liberally unto him that asketh. Yea, my God will give me, if I ask not amiss. Therefore, I shall lift up my voice unto thee. Yea, I shall cry unto thee, my God and the rock of my righteousness. Behold, my voice shall forever ascend up unto thee, my rock and my everlasting God. Amen. So I don't know if that was word perfect, but it was pretty close. And even the most casual reader will know that something is something's afoot at the OK Corral. Something is different. He's just telling a story, and all of a sudden, boom! That is just so artistic, so beautiful, so moving. And I, at the outset, want to note that this psalm begins just, I think, 2 verses after Lehi is buried. It's possible, of course, that Lehi wrote this for his funeral. I mean, we don't have any proof of that, but certainly it reflects the deep pain and sorrow that he was experiencing at that time. Lehi had, he had passed away, and his brothers were very serious about killing him. Nephi says that, they've grumbled about killing him a lot, but this time the Lord came to him and said, they're going to get you this time, and that's why you have to leave. So there's lots of contention. Lehi had always been a tremendous source of emotional support for Nephi. And we find it very significant that here Nephi is turning to the Lord for that support. It's almost as if he's saying, I don't have my father anymore. I have other people that support me, but I don't have Lehi anymore. And I'm going to have to turn to the Lord even more. And so, I have trusted in thee, and I will trust in thee forever. When he talks about deliver from his enemies, that certainly adds some context that, his brothers are actively plotting to kill him when he wrote this. And I think mostly, this psalm reflects the deep sorrow that Nephi would have felt at the time that he composed it. I mean, he talked about his personal sins and iniquities, but I'm sure that his father's death would have made his own mortality and his own inadequacies feel, even more pronounced. He would feel that even more keenly. And so, that's sort of some context between, surrounding why he wrote it. Like, for example, the song in our hymnal, "Because I have been given much, I too must give." There is a little section in there that says, "In the quiet heart is hidden sorrow that the eye can't see." That's because the author of that beautiful hymn had just lost a child. She was the one who had sorrow that the eye couldn't see. And knowing that just makes the song even that more beautiful, that she's thinking about giving and, you know, drowning her sorrows in service of others. Because I would given much, too much give. Well, that's kind of the same thought that I have when I think of Lehi losing his father. Nephi's psalm draws a lot of parallels between himself and his father. His father saw visions, Nephi saw visions, his father saw angels, he saw angels. His father praised the Lord all day, and Nephi did the same thing. And so there's a lot of parallels and connections in that, brotherhood amongst prophets that he felt. And now his support will be even more so on the Lord. Now, so that's one way to look at the psalm. Another way is to think about that this psalm and the way that it's written is a guide, if you will, or a pattern about Nephi's spiritual maturity and spiritual maturation, I should say. And I wrote a little slide here. And, nobody else has suggested this in any of my readings, but this is how I read it. Nephi starts with profound grief, almost despair for his sins. And you can hear that, he says, "I can't rejoice. My heart groans because of my sins. I'm encompassed about because of these temptations and sins which are all around me." And, he acts like he feels lost, that he's not able to deal with the pain of his own inadequacies. And then he does what a lot of us do. He tries to defeat it himself. He tries to defeat it white-knuckled, if you will. He says, "Awake, my soul." You can hear him, "No longer droop in sin. Rejoice, my heart, and do not anger again because my brothers are trying to kill me. Do not slacken my strength because of mine afflictions and my weaknesses," and so forth. So he's going to try to just overcome it by commanding himself. But then he realizes he can't do it on his own. And so he says, "Lord, wilt thou redeem my soul? Wilt thou deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies?" In and out, if you will. "Wilt thou make me that I may shake at the appearance of sin?" And then once he realizes that it's really the Lord that's doing the heavy lifting, it's the Lord that's going to change him and help him overcome his weaknesses, then he's filled with praise and gratitude for the Lord's support and his power to overcome. For truly he is mighty to save. And so, I would suggest that we can read 2 Nephi chapter 4 as a pattern for us. We start and come to the Lord with grief for our mistakes, and some of them are pronounced, much more so than Nephi's. And then we try to overcome on our own, and we should do our best, but we're never going to be good enough. We're never going to make it white-knuckled. We're going to need the Lord and his enabling power. And once we bask in his love and his grace and his capacity to change, then we're filled with gratitude and praise. "I will praise thee forever. I will not put my trust in the arm of flesh," including my own flesh, "but rather I know that cursed is he that putteth his trust in the arm of flesh." So it's a beautiful pattern and it kind of shows, it's almost like Nephi went through the wormhole. He went through this journey, realizing his dependence on the Lord and praising him. And then he writes it to kind of document his journey. It's one way to read it. My cousin and friend Randall Wright wrote a longer paper saying that not only can we read it the way I just described it, but Randall says we can read it with the idea that this is a process for how to deal with problems. It's Nephi's psalm can be read as a process, if you will, for dealing with life's problems. Now, I have a one-page slide here. I'll probably include, with Randall's permission, I haven't asked him, his paper on it. He has, I can't even think of 3 or 4 page paper that kind of outlines it, but here's what I got out of it. It's, you come to the Lord with a broken heart and a contrite spirit. And Nephi says in there, he says, um, wilt thou redeem my soul? Because my heart is broken and my spirit is contrite. So you come to the Lord and acknowledge your weaknesses. It's that way if you're facing addictions. It's that way if you're struggling with your higher education. It's that way if you're struggling with your relationships. It's that way if you're struggling with your job or any, your weight, whatever it is. You come with a broken heart, acknowledge your weaknesses. And then you acknowledge the hand of the Lord in your life by counting your blessings. It's a beautiful way of exercising faith, is to acknowledge what the Lord has already done for you. And Nephi certainly does that. He says, he lists 6 or 7 things that you've, delivered me from the great deep. You guided me in the wilderness. You delivered me from my enemies. You filled me with his love. And we'll talk more about that. Number 3 is really what was powerful to me, is that Nephi does not say, hey, this is not my fault. My brothers are trying to kill me. I have every right to be mad at them. He doesn't do that. He takes responsibility and ownership for his own mistakes and weaknesses. And, he acknowledges that he's having a hard time with a number of things, including being angry with his brothers for trying to kill him. But he does not blame them for his own weaknesses. And we will never make progress in our own journey until we take responsibility for our mistakes. Then Nephi bears testimony. I know that you give liberally unto them that asketh. I know you're going to give me if you ask not amiss, and on and on. So Nephi's bearing testimony. And as we do that, we take responsibility for our mistakes, our weaknesses, our flaws, our character flaws. We bear testimony of what we know is true. We identify and count our blessings, maybe in writing. And then we do make commitments. Nephi says, awake my soul, no longer droop in sin. Don't get angry anymore. Don't slacken my strength. Making commitments is helpful. It's just that we have to rely on the Lord to do the heavy lifting. And, AA, every organization that's really is all about change, recognizes, not every, but the good ones all recognize that you've got to rely on a higher power. Of course, the atonement of Jesus Christ is a better way to look at it in order to overcome a lot of these mistakes. So that's another way of looking at the Psalm of Nephi, is that it's sort of a pattern or a process that you can follow if you want to improve and get better. Okay. Now, Nephi didn't just provide a pattern for dealing with problems or spiritual maturation. He did it with art. It is beautiful literature. My law professor, Jack Welch, who discovered chiasmus, was showing the Book of Mormon to a Hebrew scholar who specializes in Old Testament poetry. And he says, the Mormons are so lucky. They have a beautiful book. And John said, well, I don't even know if they know it, but they do have a beautiful book. And this is exhibit A for how beautiful the book is. As I put it here, you can say it or you can say it. And the way you say it is by using art, by using poetry or music. John Croce, who's a 1970s folk singer, he said it this way. He says, every time I try to tell you, the words just came out wrong. But I have to say I love you in a song. He can't say it. You have to sing it. You have to do it with art. So, for example, you can say, you mean a lot to me. You're inspirational to me. I really want to be with you and spend time with you. That's how you would say it. Or you can say it. Now, let me make sure that I am sharing sound before I do this. After all, Peter Cetera in Chicago. Baby, you're the meaning in my life. You're the inspiration. Bring feeling to my life. You're the inspiration. I wanna have you near me. Wanna have you hear me sing. No one needs you more than I need you. But so here's my point. Of course, I'm an 80s guy, and I think that's one of the greatest love songs, ever written. But you can't communicate the same thing if you say it than if you were to write it in a poem and sing it. It's just not the same. Here's the great movie, The Dead Poet Society. Robin Williams is talking to these kids about poetry. And they got the textbook chapter, and there's a Mr. Pritchard. And Mr. Pritchard has a very robotic, mechanical way of reading poetry. And he tells them to rip that chapter right out of the book. And they're all a little bit shell-shocked that their professors tell them to rip up the textbooks. So listen to what he says about the importance of art and its power to concentrate meaning, to really concentrate what you're trying to say. All right, well, listen to what he says.
Words and language. No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. Now, see that look in Mr. Pitt's eye? Like 19th century literature has nothing to do with going to business school or medical school, right? Maybe. Mr. Hopkins, you may agree with them, thinking, yes, we should simply study our Mr. Pritchard and learn our rhyme and meter and go quietly about the business of achieving other ambitions. A little secret for you. Huddle up. Huddle up! We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
Poetry, beauty, romance, this is what we stay alive for. So let's talk about it. What did Nephi do that made us really appreciate what we stay alive for? Well, poetry, including the Psalm of Nephi, uses exalted diction, lofty ideas, noble expressions, and the whole idea is the medium, meaning the way that it's said, the way that it's expressed is just as important a part of the meaning as what's being said. And with ancient poetry, the rhythm and the parallels are not with the words don't rhyme. It's the ideas that have to have rhythm and parallels. Rhyming and syntax are not nearly as important as the synthesis of ideas. So you have ideas that match each other, okay? And that's what happens with ancient poetry. Now, in 1926, there's a fella, and his name is Herman. I can't pronounce his last name, but basically he analyzed the Psalms, the Proverbs, Lamentations, and he determined that there are a number of different kinds of psalms. There's a psalm of praise, a communal lament, an individual lament, a royal psalm, a communal thanksgiving, and an individual thanksgiving. Those are all different kinds of psalms, and they have different literary or artistic elements, and they come in different orders. And one of them is called the individual lament. Of course, this is almost exactly 100 years after the Book of Mormon was translated, and people have known for over 1,000 years. I mean, certainly King David knew that there was artistic value to the Psalms, but what was discovered in 1926 is that there's different kinds of Psalms with different kinds of elements. Now, the Psalm of Nephi is an individual lament. So that's what we're going to focus on. And the individual lament has 5 different elements. There's an invocation. It's kind of like in a prayer in our sacrament meetings today, our Heavenly Father would be the invocation. It's when you know, okay, we're going to start the poem. Then there's a complaint where you're complaining about something to the Lord. Then there's a confession of trust where you're telling the Lord that, I know that you can take care of this, Heavenly Father. Then there's a petition where you're asking the Lord to do stuff for you. And then there's a vow of praise. Those are the elements. And look, not every poem, not every individual lament has all this exactly right. There's some room for some artistic expression, but there's a lot of them. In fact, these are the individual laments listed in the Psalms by Mr. Hinkle. And I've read all of them several times, and they really do have these elements. Here's just a couple of examples. In Psalms 56, it's a very short 7-verse psalm. The invocation says, "Save me, O Lord." Like, we're going to start the poem. Hear my prayer. The complaint is, hey, these strangers have risen up against me, and the oppressors are coming after you too, Heavenly Father. And then the confession of trust is, behold, God is my helper, and the Lord is with them that uphold my soul. The petition is, okay, can you reward evil to my enemies and cut them off? The vow of praise is, I'm going to offer sacrifices to you, and I will praise thy name, O Lord. So it's a pretty textbook individual lament, pretty short. That's why I used it. There's another one here in Psalms 31. And in Psalms 31, the invocation that I went through and there's really quite a few verses. So bow down to my ear, incline to my spirit. The complaint is, I'm in trouble. My life is spent with grief. My confession of trust is, I've trusted in thee, O Lord. The petition is, make thy face to shine upon thy servant. Let the lying lips be put to silence. That's what he's asking. And the vow of praise is, blessed be the Lord, for he hath showed me his marvelous kindness. So those are two examples in the Old Testament of an individual lament where there's these 5 elements in the psalm, and they all come kind of in that order. So what about the Psalm of Nephi? Well, here we go. The invocation is perhaps the most ambiguous. And when I read all those Psalms, the invocation is really just something that tells you that the Psalm is starting. And there's really no doubt in 2 Nephi chapter 4 that you're just going along with, the narrative. And he's talking about that, I'll just read it to you. He says, and upon these things I write the things of my soul. And then he says, my soul delighteth in the things of the Lord, and my heart pondereth continually upon the things which I've heard. And then, boy, he has a complaint. Oh, wretched man that I am. I'm encompassed about by all these temptations and sins, and they easily beset me. I can't rejoice because I'm groaning because of my sins. Now, one of the interesting things about a complaint that's existent here in the Psalm of Nephi and also in some of the other Psalms is that the complaint is usually ambiguous enough to where you can't really know exactly what the particular sin is. Nephi doesn't tell us. I mean, he does mention he's angry with his brothers, but it seems much, much broader than that. And the reason that they do that is because, the I am encompassed. I, wretched man, I am is really us. It's everyone. So they keep the complaint ambiguous enough so that all of us will relate to it, and we do. When we read it, we think, "Oh, that's that." I could, if I were artistic enough, I could have written that. He's talking about how I feel, and so they keep it ambiguous enough so that it's universally applicable. The confession of trust. Oh my goodness, Nephi got it in spades. Has it in spades. I know in whom I'm trusted. My God hath been my support, and then he lists all kinds of things that God has done to earn Nephi's trust. From verses 21 through 30. First, he says, he's led me through mine afflictions in the wilderness. And here's Nephi with the Liahona trying to get food after the bow is broken. He preserved me on the waters of the great deep. We know that story. He filled me with his love, even to the consuming of my flesh. I don't know that we have that story, but Nephi talks about it in his poem, in his confession of trust. I mean, we know that he frankly forgave his brothers, and we know that he was certainly filled with compassion when he saw his descendants fall. But here he's talking about an experience where he's filled with so much charity, he can barely stand it. I mean, he says it almost consumed him. I wish I knew more about what he's talking about, but I'm glad he put it in the poem. I confounded mine enemies into the cause of them to quake before me. We know that when his brothers were giving Nephi a bad time, he shocked them and he confounded them and they quaked. He hath heard my cry by day and given me knowledge by visions in the nighttime. Again, we don't have for sure what he's talking about here. We know that Nephi, when he went up to the mountain often, he got all kinds of guidance and revelations. But I don't know about these nighttime visions. And so it's a beautiful thought that Nephi is having visions in the day and the night, just like his father. And he says, and by day have I waxed bold in mighty prayer, and my voice went up, and angels came down. And I mention this because, we know that Nephi saw an angel whenever the brothers were beating him, but it looks like he's talking about something different here. And so, again, it's an abridgment of what we have, but he's certainly confessing some amazing experiences. And then upon the wings of God's Spirit has my body been carried away to this mountain. And that's, of course, 1 Nephi chapters 11 through 15, when he's teleported really up to the top of this mountain. And he is shown the history of the world, including the end of the world. And that's what he's saying here. He says that my eyes beheld so great things that I was told not to write them. You'll remember that Nephi saw the end of the world, and he saw that John would write the book of Revelations. And the Lord told Nephi not to write it, that would be John's job. And so that appears to be what he's talking about. He was taken on a high mountain. He saw amazing things. Part of it he was not authorized to write. And so, that's his confession of trust. The petition, oh my goodness, the petition, wilt thou redeem my soul, deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies, make me shake at the appearance of sin, shut the gates of hell before me. Don't shut the gates of thy righteousness, but encircle me in the robe of thy righteousness. Make me a way for mine escape before mine enemies. Make my path straight. Don't place a stumbling block in my way. I mean, boy, he has got a petition here. And it's interesting because the petition that I read in the Old Testament and all these individual laments that Hinkle has identified, most of the time it's, hey, you know, the bad guys are going to get me and we need you to help deliver me from my enemies. And Nephi's got some of that in there, but he is going way deeper. We're talking about a baptized member of the church who, or not the church, but a baptized disciple of Jesus Christ. And so he's talking about not just forgiveness of sins, but also transformation. Will you redeem my soul? Will you make me that I may shake at the appearance of sin? I don't even want to be around the appearance of sin. Give, you know, place no more for the enemy of my soul. Help me walk in the path of the low valley. Help me to be strict in the plain road. So this is a major spiritual doctrinal advancement. His petition is more than just deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies, but change and transform me so that I lose the desire for sin and give me the spiritual capacities and the gifts to truly have the image of Christ in my countenance, is what he's really saying. So this is a beautiful, beautiful petition. And then the vow of praise, again, I have trusted in thee and I will trust in thee forever. I know that God will give liberally. God will give me. He's the rock of my righteousness, the rock of my everlasting God. It's a beautiful vow of praise at the end. So, you know, I am struck when I look at this, that what we have is an individual lament where he gets all of the elements in the right order. That this is obviously something that Nephi, who was classically educated, the learning of his father, clearly he knew something about what an individual lament is, and he crafted a beautiful one. Now, if all Nephi had done is, you know, write an individual lament with all 5 elements in the right order, it would have been a beautiful piece of art. But Nephi didn't stop there. He said it in an extremely artistic way. And I'm going to go through some of those parallelisms, some of the chiasms, some of the enallage, and with you, and just help you see just how artistic this really is. You know, frankly, I don't think most of the church knows what they have. The first I want to talk about is something that I'm not positive I'm even pronounce it right. It's enallage is the name of the word, and it's Greek or Latin for transition. And here's the idea, and you can find it in the Psalms, you can find it in the Proverbs, you can find it in the Lamentations. It's this literary device where you go from distance to closeness in the same psalm, in the same poem. And the way that you do it is that you talk about the Lord in the third person, in the abstract, and then you move to, instead of the Lord, you move to you or thou. And I'll say you. So, for example, the 23rd Psalm, you all know it. The Lord is my shepherd. That's the distance. He, meaning the Lord, maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The Lord leadeth me beside the still waters. The Lord restores my soul, and the Lord leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. And then later on in the psalm, it gets more personal. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. He says thou, but I'll say you, so you can get the point. He doesn't say the Lord is with me. He says you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me. You anoint my head. And so they use this technique to show how the author or the poet is moving closer to God. It's just a beautiful technique, really. In fact, you know, there were some commentators that wanted to do away with this analogy because they thought it was just so grammatically incorrect. And so finally, fortunately, there was, you know, enough poets on the team that said, well, what are you doing? You're ruining it. This is what they're trying to demonstrate. Well, what does the Book of Mormon do? 2 Nephi chapter 4. He starts with, in his confession of trust, he hath led me through mine afflictions. He hath preserved me from the waters. The Lord filled me with his love. The Lord confounded mine enemies. The Lord heard my cry by day. He gave me knowledge by visions in the nighttime. But then when he gets to the petition, he says, will you redeem my soul? Will you deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies? Will you make me that I may shake at the appearance of sin? You don't shut the gates of my righteousness. Will you encircle me around in the robe of thy righteousness? How poetic is that? Will you please make a way for an escape before mine enemies? And in fact, he's so good at it. I didn't put this in there, but he also does it again, back and forth, because he says, He says, I have trusted in thee and I will trust in thee forever, you forever. He says, I will not put the trust in the arm of flesh, for I know that cursed is he that putteth his trust in the arm of flesh. Yeah, I know that God, so he goes back to the distance. I know that God will give liberally to him that asks. My God will give me if I ask not amiss. And then he says, and then I will lift up my voice unto you. I will cry unto you, the rock of my righteousness. My voice shall forever ascend up into you. So he does it twice. He goes distance to closeness between the petition and between the confession of trust and the petition. And then in the vow of praise, he gives us a brief. I'm going to go back to God did this, but I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you. It's just a beautiful art, really. It's the, if you want to say it, then you can say it. All right. Now let's talk about something else that Nephi does. And that is that he uses parallelisms, if you will. And in this case, at the very beginning, he has two couplets and then a triplet. My soul delights in the things of the Lord. My heart ponders continually. Soul delights, heart ponders continually. Notwithstanding the great goodness of the Lord, his great and marvelous works, my heart exclaimeth, my heart sorroweth, my soul grieveth. My heart exclaimeth, O wretched man that I am, sorrow because of my flesh, grieveth because of mine iniquities. And so, when I quoted or recited the poem, you might have noticed there's a certain amount of repetition in there. And that's exactly right. That's exactly Nephi's point. He's emphasizing the progression of ideas that are parallel to each other in a beautiful way. There's also a rhythm to the psalm. And it's, I don't want to say cool, but it's artistic. He hath led me, he hath filled me, he hath preserved me, he hath confounded, he hath heard my cry, he gave me knowledge of visions by nighttime. He does it again when he says, why should my heart and my soul, why should my soul, why should my flesh, why should my strength slacken, why should I yield to sin, why should I give way to temptations, why am I angry? There's just a rhythm to this in both of those places. And, again, in modern poetry, we emphasize with rhyming and we emphasize with alliteration and we emphasize with the actual letters, if you will, the consonants and the vowels. But in ancient poetry, it's the rhythm of ideas and there's a flow to it. And, I've got here Martin Luther King. And he certainly understood the idea that rhythm in an artistic piece can really capture and emphasize the import of the message. So Dr. King's message of racial equality was very important, but it never would have carried the power that it did because of how he said it. Listen to the rhythm in his speech. And this is just the very end. I mean, he certainly, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. I didn't capture that because that would have taken 10 minutes. But listen to him when he says, let freedom ring.
So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. Not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee.
And he goes on to explain about all the different places where freedom is to ring. Well, you can feel that rhythm. There is a rhythm to what some people consider one of the greatest orators in the modern American history. And Nephi had that rhythm. And we're going to, you could hear it, why do I want it? So it's when you read it, and particularly if you were to try to memorize it, wow, you can feel the rhythm in what he did. Now, look at this, okay? Because now Nephi's showing off a little bit. He's got 3 couplets in his, confession where he commands himself, awake my soul. And I've got it in color here, okay? He's got a couplet, 2 lines, and they have an A and a B, or in this case, a red and a green. And the A, or the red, is parallel to the red in the second line, and the green is parallel to the green in the second line. He does it 3 times. Awake my soul, no longer droop in sin. Rejoice my heart, that's awake my soul. Give place no more for the enemy of my soul. Then he gets to the next couplet. Don't anger again because of mine enemies. Don't slacken my strength because of mine afflictions. You see the parallelism. So A1, A2, A1, A2, B1, B2, B1, B2. Rejoice, O my heart, and cry unto the Lord, O Lord, I will praise thee forever. Rejoice, my heart, my soul will rejoice, my God and the rock of my salvation. It's incredibly complex and incredibly artistic that he was able to capture the depth of his pain and feeling by doing it in such an artistic way. And look what he does now. When he gets to the petition, it's a chiasm. Most of you know that a chiasm is when you express ideas in reverse order, with the back end of it accentuating or amplifying what you said the first time. So I've got it in color coded. Wilt thou deliver me out of the hands of mine enemies? Wilt thou make a way for my escape from mine enemies? Wilt thou make me that I may shake at the appearance of sin? Encircle me around in the robe of thy righteousness. And then look at the center, which is the key aspect of any chiasm. He says, may the gates of the hell be shut continually, because my heart is broken and my spirit is contrite. So you have this line with two little couplets. Wilt thou not shut the gates of thy righteousness? So shut the gates of hell. Don't shut the gates of thy righteousness. Walk in the path of the low valley, strict in the plain road. I mean, this is about as artistic as it gets, in my opinion. Wilt thou deliver me? So he writes them in inverted order, and he even gets the two couplets at the end. I mean, this is I couldn't write this if you gave me 3 lifetimes. And then he ends it with 3, 2, 2, 3. I didn't know how to format it the right way, but AAA, BB, CC, DDD. I have trust in thee. I will trust in thee forever. I'll not put my trust in the arm of flesh. When I first started memorizing that, that's really what clued into me. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is repetition on purpose. I know that cursed is he that putteth his trust in the arm of flesh. Cursed is he that putteth his trust in man or maketh flesh his arm. God will give liberally to everyone that asks. He's going to give to me. I will lift up my voice. I will cry. My voice shall forever ascend up unto thee. So all the way through it, and there's more, but I've only had time to go over this much. But Nephi, not only, just to summarize kind of what he's saying here, is not only did he get an individual lament that had all the 5 elements in the right order and did a phenomenal job, but he did it in an artistic way. He has enallage to show distance to closeness to the Lord. He's got parallelisms that are like completely parallel from start to finish. He's got a gorgeous chiasm in there. And he's got at the end, the connection of ideas 3, 2, 2, 3. It is spectacular artistry. And, I'm biased maybe, but in reading all the Psalms and particularly all the individual laments, I don't think there's a close second. This is, in my judgment, the most beautiful psalm. There's a possible exception of Psalm 51, which tradition has it that David wrote it after he was confronted with his sin with Bathsheba, and it is beautiful. But with a possible exception of Psalm 51, there's no close second to 2 Nephi chapter 4. And we have members of the church that don't even know anything about it. They just kind of recognize it's a little more artistic than the rest of the way, but no, it's amazing. So let me share with you one last thought, which is that you can put this song to music. And there's a fellow named Staley, and he took the Psalm of Nephi and put it to the words of Be Still My Soul. And it went to churches all over the country. People are singing the Psalm of Nephi all over the country. They don't even know that they're singing the Book of Mormon. Protestant churches and spiritualists, all kinds of people. So let me just, you can't find them all, but with the help of my brother David, we have a little collage of some of the folks that are singing the Psalm of Nephi, some of which don't even know what they're doing. So here we go. I should probably just end there. You know, 2 months ago, we talked about history and how the Book of Mormon came together. Last month, we talked about philosophy and the world-class thinking that went into 2nd Nephi chapter 2 and 42. And, you know, there were some folks that were very kind to me, but they were basically, yeah, I don't need a philosopher to tell me that there's good and evil. I just need to be inspired. But others, of course, felt like, wow, I didn't realize how brilliant the Book of Mormon really is, that it's advanced thinking that they're just now coming around to 100 years later. And now we talk about poetry and how this is extremely advanced, beautiful, artistic. It doesn't rhyme, and so unless you study it the way that you know, from the perspective of the people who wrote it, you won't fully get it, but it is beautiful that you can read it. Now, I will tell you that, you know, the way that I've structured it all is, you know, I read everything I could get my hands on the Psalm of Nephi, but, you know, nobody had organized it the way I did tonight. And so I'm not a professional linguist or whatever, but this is my understanding of how it fits together. You know, and next month, we're going to talk about the analogy or the allegory of the olive tree, and what a beautiful doctrinal gem that is, but also whoever wrote that knew an awful lot about olive horticulture. And so you can study, here's one of the many points. You can study the Book of Mormon any way you want to, historically, philosophically, artistically, botanically, on, and you'll never get to the bottom of it. It's the pearl of great price. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And it points us to Jesus Christ. It points us to his atonement. It points us to the truthfulness of Joseph Smith's prophetic claims. There's no book like it anywhere in the world. And when I read the Psalm of Nephi, I'm so moved to try to rely on the Lord the way he did, to try to take responsibility for my weaknesses the way he did, to try to petition him with the depth and feeling that he did, to come with the kind of broken heart that he had. And if I can just pattern my own worship after what he wrote and left for us, then I will be much more advanced in my spiritual journey and my Christian discipleship. I'm so grateful that we have it. And, you know, the idea that Joseph Smith could have just spun this off in an hour or two. I mean, you know, 20 verses, how long would it take him to dictate that without any research and collaboration after what you've seen tonight? You know, but that's not really the point. I'm not trying to prove that the Book of Mormon is true. I'm trying to get to its meaning and appreciate it with greater depth. I know it's true from the Spirit of the Holy Ghost. So I hope that you read it. I hope you study it. I hope that you get the point that there's so many ways to look at the Book of Mormon, and you're never going to get to the bottom of it. It is that good. It's that deep. There's no book in the world like it. And how blessed we are to have it. I hope we digest it, study it, pore over it, feast upon it daily. I hope we share it with those who need the prophetic truths contained in it. And I hope that we allow it to serve its primary function, which is to testify of Jesus Christ and bring us more closely to him. I know that it's true. I love it. I love you all, and we'll see you next month. Now, in conclusion, tomorrow on the website, if you don't have the website, send me an email or a text. I'll get it to you. But David, my brother, created a website. It has all these recordings. It also has all the written materials, the slides. There's about 30 or 40 slides that are in the PowerPoint that I didn't show you. And you can use it, just, you know, change it, modify it, do whatever you want with it. There's no ownership, copyright, anything like that. Anything that we can do to get people to read the Book of Mormon is my only objective. So that'll be up there tomorrow after I get a chance to proofread it and make sure that Allison gives her stamp of approval.